That's a pen. It's a writing utensil.
Is it?
What is that?
Spent shell casing. That, Mr. Marlowe, is a gun.
I first watched The Case for Christ a couple of years ago when it was given to an atheist friend of mine in a genuine attempt to convert him. For those who don't know, this is a movie about an atheist investigative reporter who sets out to prove that the resurrection of Jesus never happened. As he conducts his research, however, he finds out that there's more evidence for it than he ever imagined, and becomes a believer. It's based on the real-life story of Lee Strobel, who wrote a book by the same name. While both stories follow Strobel as he transitions from a skeptic to an evangelical, the book is written in the format you'd expect from an investigative journalist, a personal account of his journey with large blocks of text focused solely on the research. Conversely, the movie reframes Strobel's journey into a typical story arc. Despite the film's title, this isn't really an argument for Christ's existence. It's the story of a man who overcomes his arrogance and becomes a devoted believer. For that reason, this video isn't going to focus on debunking Strobel's evidence for God. Instead, I want to talk about the underlying message of this movie, that Lee Strobel becomes a better person after converting. The movie takes some fascinating liberties with the story, adding in new details that drastically alter the real events. Except in instances where I explicitly call him out, don't consider my criticisms against the movie Strobel as marks against the real person. This character is extremely obnoxious and in some cases despicable. It's pretty obvious that they wrote him to fit the narrative they wanted. With all that said, let's go over some of Strobel's supposed changes during the movie. Claim 1. Strobel learns to challenge his bias. The introduction of the Case for Christ book begins with the story of James Dixon, a black man accused of shooting a cop during an argument with his girlfriend. On the surface, the evidence against Dixon was damning. There were several eyewitnesses to the fight, and a shot had recently been fired from a gun registered in his name. Dixon spent 362 days in jail before his trial began. Shortly before his scheduled court date, the prosecution offered him a plea deal that would see him released in only a few days thanks to time served, so Dixon agreed. However, it's later discovered that the officer was wounded by an illegal pen gun he kept in his pocket. Embarrassed and afraid of the consequences, he tried to frame Dixon. Thankfully, an informant comes forward with the truth, Dixon's name is cleared, and all's well that ends well. The real Strobel had little involvement with the case other than covering it during his time as a reporter. He credits the incident as the push he needed to rethink his biases and more thoroughly examine evidence. In the movie, Strobel is covering the case as it's happening, and even has an interview with Dixon, renamed Hicks, while he's awaiting trial. In this version, Strobel discovers that Hicks was a criminal informant working for the cop who got shot, and the police are offering him a plea deal to keep him quiet because it would embarrass the department if it came out. So Strobel agrees to leak the story and turn public opinion against Hicks to ensure he goes away for a long time. Like the real Dixon, Hicks says he feels like he has no choice but to plead guilty. But this time, he directly blames Strobel for the outcome.
Why not maintain your innocence? Why cop a plea?
Your story didn't give me no choice, did it? Did your story give me a choice?
Hicks is still proven innocent by the discovery of the pen gun, but this time it's Strobel himself who uncovers the truth. Unfortunately, he's not able to clear Hicks's name before he's attacked in prison and left in critical condition. When visiting him in the hospital, Strobel apologizes for not seeing the truth, to which Hicks responds,
You didn't want to see it.
This event happens late in the film, when Strobel is deep into his research to disprove God and frustrated that the evidence isn't lining up how he wants. The timing of that is important, as it drastically alters the meaning of Hicks's words and the significance of the real events this story is based on. In the book, the real Strobel says this about the Dixon case.
To me, Dixon was an obvious troublemaker, a failure, the unemployed product of a broken family. The cops were the good guys. Prosecutors didn't make mistakes. Looking through those lenses, all the original evidence seemed to fall neatly into place. Where there had been inconsistencies or gaps, I naively glossed them over. When police told me the case was airtight, I took them at their word and didn't delve much further. But when I changed those lenses, trading my biases for an attempt at objectivity, I saw the case in a whole new light. Finally, I allowed the evidence to lead me to the truth, regardless of whether it fit my original presuppositions.
This feels like an important moment of growth for a man who was forced to confront some of the realities of our system, but none of this introspection is depicted in the movie, and I do understand why certain changes were made. The audience needs to see the events that make Strobel change. But by making Strobel the agent that determines Hicks's fate, they strip away the moral of the story. Dixon was coerced into pleading guilty after nearly a year of unjust imprisonment and prejudice against defendants accused of shooting cops. He was a victim of the system. Hicks was forced to plead guilty because of Strobel's story, and it's only Strobel's discovery of the pen gun that frees him. The system wasn't the problem, Strobel was. And so, when Hicks tells him,
You didn't want to see it.
the movie wants us to think about how this relates to Strobel's rejection of God. But, I don't know. I can't help but feel like Hicks was talking about something else. Something that might have caused Strobel to write him off as a lost cause whose life didn't even matter. I just can't place my finger on what that might be. But it's all for a good cause, right? Because now Strobel has learned the importance of examining the evidence from all angles. Except, no, he hasn't. In his quest to prove that Christianity is a hoax, Strobel interviews several Christian apologists. All of these conversations involve Strobel encouraging his sources to admit that it's gotta just be a lie, right? Come on, just admit it. You're not an idiot.
If I turned in a story that was this jumbled, I'd be out of a job.
And the Christians respond with, "Oh, you silly atheist. Here are some facts. Bet you didn't think we had those, did ya? Why don't you just believe it already? I mean, come on, what do you got to lose? Just join us. Just do it. Just come on. Jesus with us." At no point does he hear out counter-arguments from secular historians. The implicit claim here is that, as an atheist, he serves as the expert witness for that cause. But he's going up against people who have dedicated their lives to proving this thing true, and the best he can do to challenge them is come up with wild theories like,
Maybe the eyewitnesses to the resurrection, maybe they're delusional. You know what I mean? Maybe they only thought they saw Jesus, or maybe it was like mind control.
And so, it's not long after his final meeting with Hicks that Strobel, frustrated that he hasn't found the answers he wanted, gives up on his mission and converts. But if he really learned a lesson from Hicks, then shouldn't it be now, when he feels like there's only one answer, that he considers looking at it from new angles? Ones that he might not be capable of seeing on his own? Nope. In fact, screw the whole thing. He quits his job as a reporter and becomes a minister. This is his life now. Claim 2. Strobel becomes a better husband. Strobel's quest to disprove God begins when his daughter nearly chokes to death at a restaurant. She's saved at the last minute by a nurse who tells his wife Leslie that she's only there because something told her she needed to be. And that something was Jesus.
It's not luck. It's Jesus.
And bam, that's it. The wife is now full on into God. She starts hanging out with the nurse, who assures her that Jesus is real and here and good. Strobel is immediately dismissive of his wife's conversion and grows increasingly distraught as she delves further into religion.
I talked to Jesus. I told him I want him in my life.
You what? Why?
It upsets him so much that he feels he has no choice but to prove the whole thing is a hoax. So, watch out, Christians. A man who wants to tell his wife, "I told you so," is on the case. Strobel doesn't tell Leslie about his plan, opting instead to drink heavily, yell at her, and frown whenever he sees a Bible. The movie makes it explicitly clear that if things don't change soon, they're destined for divorce.
You're cheating on me with Jesus.
Before we go further into this, I want to look at the reasons why Leslie became a Christian. And again, I want to stress that we're just talking about the movie character here and not the real person. The first line we get from Leslie that isn't frivolous babble as she watches her daughter eat spaghetti is this.
You know, I'm feeling pretty good about myself.
Yeah?
How's that?
I am married to a published author.
It's very impressive.
Isn't it?
On the surface, this sounds like a sweet, innocent thing to say to your spouse. But when you look at it in the full context of the movie, it's heartbreakingly sad. Leslie has no job and no friends that we see other than this nurse she met 5 minutes ago. Given that the nurse is the only person she turns to during her big crisis moments, it's not unfair to speculate that this is the most important relationship in her life aside from her marriage. But we don't see Leslie and Strobel interacting much in the movie unless they're arguing. So with no friends, an absent husband, and no career or even hobbies that we see, Leslie was basically a big blank slate who needed something to occupy her time. As Leslie gets more involved with the church, she tells Strobel how she's learning to love everything, including him, more deeply. and she's never felt anything more real in her entire life. A revelation that seriously upsets him.
I know this is a lot.
A lot?
hon.
A lot? You dropped this on me. What does that even mean?
Well, I don't know what it means, but I know it's a good thing for me, for us.
No,
Yes,
okay, okay,
yes.
this is not us, Leslie. Whatever this is, okay, it is not us.
Can you
are on
listen to
your
me
own.
and not get
I
mad?
am listening to you, and that's the problem. So if you're serious about
And
this...
I am.
Okay, well then I don't know what to say to you.
Don't
about
say
whatever
anything then,
this
just
is.
listen to what I'm trying to say because I'm trying to explain that I felt something that is maybe more real than anything I've ever felt in my life.
More real than anything you felt in your life.
Okay, I'm not
Got
trying
it.
to compare.
Got it.
I'm
No, you know what? I don't want to hear any
Come
more
on.
of this.
And I can understand this reaction to an extent. If my partner completely shifted her worldview and then said this to me, I would be concerned. At the very least, I would want to try to make some effort to understand what it was she was getting out of this thing. But Strobel hears this and further devotes himself to his research, leaving his wife alone to care for their newborn son and toddler daughter. Keep in mind that she doesn't even know why he's going all across the country for days on end. I can only assume he tells her it's for work, which is a lie. Strobel is such a phenomenally terrible partner that the real miracle here is that they've stayed together this long. Even after watching his daughter nearly die in his arms, Strobel walks it off like nothing happened, barely saying 2 words about it to his wife. While she consistently tries to reach out to him, he has no interest in reciprocating. The only indication that he even cares about her are these random flashbacks that occur while he's traveling. When he does talk about his feelings, it's with his mentor, and even then, his biggest concern is that she's no longer his wife.
The thing of it is, she's different. She's actually different. Yeah, that's what scares the heck out of me. Just miss my wife.
Pairing this with Leslie's line from earlier, we can identify what Strobel's real problem is. Her life no longer revolves around him. She's developing her own identity. I would argue that it's not religion that makes Leslie feel real. It's the opportunity to sit with her emotions and feel like someone is listening. When Strobel reveals to Leslie that he's been lying to her the past year to prove that this whole thing was a big con, she just shrugs and shakes her head at what a big, silly goof he is, leaving her alone when she was 9 months pregnant. But it's okay because, hey, he realized he was wrong and he's a believer now. So the two kneel down, pray, and for the first time in the movie, Strobel finally has a deep conversation with his wife. Or with God while she's in the room. Improvement. And hey, maybe this will lead to them being more open and honest with each other. Maybe getting a chance to express feelings you have a hard time talking about is what makes prayer valuable. But it's frustrating that Strobel never acknowledges his harmful behaviors over the past year. His communication problems, substance abuse issues, and the chronic emotional neglect of his family are never talked about. So again, I have to ask, has he actually changed in any substantive way? Has his relationship with his wife really improved? Can all of the problems they've had really be attributed to a difference in belief? Given that the movie ends here, I guess its answer is yes. Claim 3. Strobel overcomes his daddy issues. Strobel only consults one skeptic during his research, an agnostic professor of psychology. At last, we have an opportunity to challenge some of the apologist testimonials he's heard so far and finally listen to some...
I mean, if Charles Manson can turn his followers into murderous zombies, surely the followers of the Christ cult could be convinced of their own delusions.
Christ, I hate this guy. Amazingly, it only takes her a few seconds to debunk that one, which leaves her time to ask a very peculiar question.
It's about your father. I'm just curious what your relationship with him is like.
Complicated.
Let me guess. Distant, cold, doesn't give much affirmation or express love.
Guilty on all charges. Why?
I imagine as a skeptic, you're familiar with history's great names in atheism. Hume, Nietzsche, Sartre, Freud.
Of course, yeah, some of my greatest heroes.
Did you know that all of them had a father who either died when they were young, abandoned them, or was physically or emotionally abusive? In the world of therapy, it's called a father wound.
While this is the most overt call-out of Strobel's daddy issues, the film has already peppered in several remarks hinting at their tense relationship. We finally meet the heinous monster midway through the film, and boy, he sure seems normal. But he reveals his true colors when he gets mildly upset that they didn't name their son John.
It's a beautiful name, but John has been in the Strobel line for generations.
Strobel responds with sarcasm, which results in his dad politely excusing himself. And that's it. His dad is never seen again. So how does the film resolve this lingering tension between the two? Well, as we should have expected, God comes in to lend a hand. After his father's funeral, Strobel searches his dad's office and breaks into tears when he discovers evidence that his dad really did love him. And so, at long last, he can bury his long-standing hatred for the man and open his heart to Jesus. So, we need to talk about how the movie frames the narrative here. In the scene with his dad, Strobel is extremely hostile and makes some lewd comments.
Your grandpa's John, so's your older brother.
Mm-hmm. It's also the euphemism for a toilet and the client of a prostitute.
Lee, really?
From his aggressive posture to the chastising remarks made by his wife and mom, Strobel is clearly portrayed as the bad guy here. At no point is his anger given justification. In fact, the film goes out of its way to say his father loved him very much, and Strobel was just too stubborn to see it. It almost feels cruel, the way his mom drives the point home.
Loved you, son. He really loved you.
Ultimately, Strobel's rage against his father is presented as another personal failing that prevents him from accepting Christ. But something feels like it's missing here. Strobel didn't even want to tell his parents he had another kid. That kind of hatred doesn't stem simply from a misunderstanding. As it turns out, there is more to the story. According to an article in the Herald, there was a scene where, on the night of Strobel's high school graduation, his father tells him that he doesn't have enough love for him to fill his little finger. I have sat through this movie twice and never seen this, so I can only assume it was removed, and that is an interesting choice. In the final cut of the movie, Strobel's dad is completely absolved of any responsibility for their contentious relationship. While the film never claims his dad was perfect, Strobel is still left feeling like he was the real problem all along. I can't say for sure why that scene was cut, maybe they just needed to shorten the runtime, but its removal does seem to fit with the message they wanted to present. Throughout the film, we're given several speeches about how Jesus loves you and God wants to be your father, followed by shots of a stone-faced Strobel. And here's where the movie reveals the real point of Daddy Strobel's subplot. Skepticism isn't really rooted in facts and logic. If you don't believe in spite of all the amazing evidence, it's probably because you have daddy issues, just like those famous atheists.
Some of my greatest heroes.
So does Strobel change here? I guess in this case we have to say yes. The question is, will religion help him come to terms with the unresolved issues he had with his father, or will he be mollified with promises of a glorious reconciliation in heaven? Does the answer matter as long as he finds peace? Well, I think it does. Strobel should not be guilted into seeing his father as some lionized figure. Everyone in the movie was ready to defend this guy, but he deserves to be called out for what he did. A child is under no obligation to forgive a parent, especially when that parent doesn't even bother to ask for it. Toward the end of the movie, as Strobel agonizes over what to believe in, his atheist mentor gives him some advice.
At some point, young man, you're going to have to plant your flag on a mountain of uncertainty where not every question is answered. The human mind will never get to the bottom of every mystery in the cosmos. Believing in God, not believing in God, either way, still takes a leap of faith.
I actually appreciate the heart of what's being said here. That even if you try to stack up all the evidence, you'll never know for sure, and it's ultimately up to you to decide what to believe in. Unfortunately, in the very next scene, the film slips in this little comment.
Here's where the chili meets the cheese, my friend. One of my heroes was C.S. Lewis, a man who began as a skeptic, much like yourself. At the end of his journey, you know what he said? He said if Christianity is false, it's of zero importance. But if it's true, there's nothing more important in the entire universe.
Well, that kind of takes out the choice element, doesn't it? You may never know one way or the other, but believing is still the better option. And just in case there's any doubt, he gives a little nod as to what he's really talking about.
So you want your wife back? Well, hey, guess what? People in hell want ice water. Not everybody gets everything they want.
Between Strobel's daddy issues, violent outbursts, and substance abuse, we're led to believe that his life is worse for not having religion in it. This is based on the real Strobel's account that, before converting, he was a hedonist. He admits that his drinking and anger problems were so bad that his daughter would hide in her room whenever he came home. His rationale for living like this was that if there is no God, then there is no accountability, or eternal consequences. But what about the immediate consequences? His daughter was terrified of him. He was destroying his body. He made life worse for the people around him. Is that not enough to warrant change? This isn't the first time I've heard the argument that if God isn't real, then there's nothing stopping you from doing bad things. But that's only true if you don't have a conscience. Maybe religion can help people appreciate doing the right thing for its own sake, but claiming it's a prerequisite for moral behavior is extremely cynical, and as this movie demonstrates, it doesn't just make you into a good person. I'm sure you'll be shocked to hear that the case for Christ did not turn me or my friend into believers. For me, the question of whether God is real stopped being important a long time ago. Ultimately, I think the only thing that matters is what you do with your belief, or lack thereof. Despite what Strobel says, all actions have consequences, whether it be for the people around us, total strangers, or the people who live long after we're gone. That should be all the incentive we need to do good, because we know what this world is like. We know that life is often cruel and unfair, and that's really what makes doing the right thing all the more important. It matters because it matters. Okay, so just what were they thinking, including a story in here, where our main character, the one who is supposed to use his journalism skills to prove God exists, nearly gets an innocent man killed because of his crappy journalism? I mean, what? Why do you think I would trust him after that? And I didn't even talk about how they waste 10 minutes proving that Jesus couldn't have survived the crucifixion, with excruciating details about how bad crucifixion is. 'Cause yeah, that's for sure where the root of my atheism lies. I really believed that Jesus was just faking up there when he died. Have these people even talked to a real skeptic? What was going on?